and welcome to UWS Careers Café. I'm your host, Orna Ramsey. We have a guest who brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to our virtual studio. Joining us is Elaine Wotherspoon, PGDE Secondary Programme Leader from the School of Education and Social Sciences at the University of the West of Scotland. Today's episode is all about the PGDE teaching qualifications at UWS. Whether you are an aspiring educator or someone curious about the world of teaching, you are in for a treat. We will be diving into the details of the program, exploring the unique aspects that set UWS apart, and gaining valuable insights from someone at the forefront of teacher education. Hi, Elaine. Welcome. And would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Elaine. I am the Programme Leader for the PGDE Secondary Programme. Prior to working at the university, I was a secondary teacher in lots of places around Scotland, but mostly in the West Coast, Ayrshire and Argyll and Bute. And I'm qualified in physical education. That's my secondary subject.
Fantastic. So we have both been working in the West of Scotland for a very long time, and it's great to see that now you moved on to the next generation teachers. Having experience helps us to know exactly what it's like, across the country, different variety of different schools and different settings and different backgrounds as well. So what inspired you to pursue a teaching degree?
I did my undergraduate when I was just a pup. I was only 18. So when you're a teenager and you're trying to make decisions about what you want to do for your future, it can be quite daunting. But it was primarily for me focused around, I loved sport. I, played on lots of different teams, and I had just wonderful relationships with my PE teachers. So I would credit them as being the reason that I got into teaching. But primarily it was about making a difference. I felt like it would be a career that could be rewarding and that I could really enjoy, but also I could have an impact and make a difference on young people's lives. So even as a wee youngster, I was aware that was what teaching was about, and it was definitely what attracted me to the profession.
I think making an impact, teachers' roles are so important for young people. It makes a difference in whether they attend school or not, like that subject, or choose as a career as well. So in your case, obviously, that's how you ended up being in this position, and clearly you enjoyed it and you love your job, still making a difference now.
One of the reasons I was really interested in moving into the university sector is I felt like I could make a difference to more young people and to student teachers. So in my head, I was thinking, well, if I inspire all these student teachers and they go out and teach hundreds of pupils throughout their career, then, even a small amount of difference across all of those student teachers could be hugely impactful. So it's still the same reason, but just a slightly different slant, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, making waves in a bigger, field. We have, as careers advisors, we see many students who are looking into teaching and looking at opportunities, what kind of jobs out there and how to get there, So let's talk about the qualifications that our university offer.
Sure.
And when do we accept applications? And do you mind telling us about the overview first, please? Thank you.
Sure. So we offer a PGDE in secondary and in primary. The PGDE secondary offers subjects PE, maths, modern languages, science, art and design, and English. I mentioned both programs because we do work quite closely together. They are separate programs, but we share a module, for example, where we work with primary and secondary colleagues. That is obviously because in the world of education, we work together, and so we try our best to kind of replicate that. So that's our kind of offerings. The applications generally follow the UCAS undergraduate application cycle, even though it's PGDE, it is an undergraduate application system. For the PGDE secondary programme, it depends on the subject when we stop then taking applications. So, for example, our PE programme will stop on the UCAS deadline, which was just at the end of January there. So we don't consider any applications for physical education after that date. For our other secondary subjects, we might consider applications after that date, depending on how close we are to target, how many spaces we have left, those sorts of things. And so for this year at the moment, we are still currently recruiting in all of our other secondary subjects, with the exception of PE, of course. For the primary programme, obviously, I don't want to speak too much for the programme leader of that programme, but I do obviously know a bit about it. And if people are interested in knowing that, I would like to help them. They are also in a very similar scenario to PE. They're quite competitive, quite selective, and are very unlikely to consider any applications beyond the UCAS deadline.
Yeah, just to summarize then, the UCAS application deadlines strictly apply to primary education and also PE education, and the
generally,
other, generally, and this year, currently at the moment, you are recruiting for the other subjects.
Yeah, the other secondary subjects,
Secondary subjects, that's great. So how can applicants stand out in a competitive pool of candidates in their applications?
I think that's probably the most common question I get as a programme leader, whether it's at interview or someone emailing in asking for information. And I think when we're talking about educating people to be teachers, we're not really they're not just applying to a course, and we're not just considering them for a course. We're considering them for a profession. And so for me, obviously we're guided by the entry requirements of the General Teaching Council for Scotland and all the things that we have to do. But for me, the thing that stands out is the personal qualities that you can show during an interview. Because as most people are probably aware, and as you mentioned earlier, it's the relationships with the young people that are so important. And without those, it's very difficult to be a good teacher. And so being able to show passion for learning, being able to show an interest in working with children and a desire to make a difference and have an impact, and to be warm and personable, and all those things that you probably had with teachers yourself and the teachers that you remember. It's those personal qualities that become so important and really do make candidates stand out. Now, obviously, knowledge of schools and knowledge of what's going on in secondary education or primary education is very important, particularly at interview, because the questions we ask will ask you about that. But ultimately, if you're asking me what makes someone stand out, it is that personal kind of, I guess, even personality. You might say teacher personality, maybe, but it's just that idea of, can we see them in front of children? Do they have this desire to be in education, and those personal qualities that we might expect to see in a teacher? And there's loads of those, but that's probably the thing that stands out the most with anyone I interview, and I interview hundreds of people all the time.
Yes, absolutely. So we both see hundreds of people all the time, looking at how they can do well. Obviously, we all want them to succeed. You mentioned entry requirements there. So what would be the typical entry requirements if they were home students?
Yeah, so typical entry requirements are set by the General Teaching Council for Scotland, and they're the same for any student teacher. Obviously, then we have our own admissions procedures and all that sort of stuff, but you need to have higher English and National 5 mathematics. That's generally a requirement. And then for secondary subjects, you have to have a degree in the subject that you are looking to study. So there's obviously a range of degrees you can have, and it's difficult to nail down one. But for example, sports coaching for PE, a mathematics degree for mathematics, there are nuances to that, but generally you have to have studied the subject that you want to teach for secondary. For primary, it's I'm not going to say any degree, because that's not the case, but it doesn't have the same subject requirements. It is studying an undergraduate degree, and we detail kind of the specific requirements for each of the secondary subjects and alternative qualifications that we might accept. That's all on our website. But yeah, generally for any teacher, it's the higher English, the National 5 mathematics, and for secondary, it's a degree related to the subject that you're going to teach. Some institutions will require an honours degree. Some subjects will require an honours. It sometimes varies year on year as well, depending on how competitive the programmes are. We would generally recommend an honours degree, really just for the fact that you're going to come and study at that level, and so it benefit your academic studies to have already engaged with an honours degree. But in the secondary programme, we have taken people with ordinary degrees. It's not something that would preclude someone from applying to secondary. I believe that for primary, it is an honours degree that they're looking for, a good honours degree. And And again, that does vary year on year depending on how.
Yeah, so for secondary, then degree, and then as long as they have higher English and Math 5 maths.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So some people might have a degree, but they don't have the subject specifics. In that case, you wouldn't accept.
Correct. Yeah, there are routes where they call it kind of make-up credits. There are routes where if you don't have the necessary credits, you can go and, for example, undertake a module at the Open University. You can do kind of top-up courses and those sorts of things. So it's not an automatic kind of, there's no route for you. It does probably just mean though that you have to do some additional work. And I think, you know, we're quite happy to check someone's credits and let them know what they have, what they don't have, and our admissions colleagues are great in helping us with that. But yeah, if you don't have the credits related to your secondary subject, then it's not possible to apply until you have those credits. But there are a couple of different routes and you can do that. And in some scenarios, an HND or an HNC can help with that. But it's not for everyone. So it's difficult to say that, yeah, if you've got an HND, that absolutely will apply. But in some scenarios, that can be the route. But probably the best advice is to get your qualifications checked and to find out, you know, if you've got them, and if you don't have them, what do you then need to do? And we can't point them towards a specific module or a specific course, because of course we wouldn't do that. But we can advise them as to, you need to make up these credits in this area. You know, they can go and research that themselves.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. So, what common questions can applicants expect during a selection interview?
Interviews are one of my favourite parts of my job. I think getting to know people and hearing about their experiences and their skills and abilities, it is it's such an interesting part of what I do. And I think that probably gives an insight into the kind of questions that we're going to ask. They are going to be about, you know, what experiences do you have relevant to education and being a teacher? And what knowledge do you have relevant to education and being a teacher? What skills and abilities do you have that might make you a good teacher? You know, all of these sorts of things we would ask. And then there probably would be some subject-specific variations in terms of art and design might ask you about your portfolio or the work that you've done across the different mediums within art. And certainly all of our subjects when they interview would require some sort of presentation, because of course that is what people are trying to do. They're trying to be standing in front of people for the rest of their life. So we do require applicants to do a presentation. And then there are some subject-specific requirements for PE around practical ability. And so there are a few nuances, but generally it's some sort of presentation, an interview that talks about skills, abilities, experiences relative to being a good teacher and being in education.
Yeah, that's great. So we talked about experience. Sometimes students say, well, I've never worked, so how can I gain experience? So what kind of advice would you give?
Yeah, I mean, I'm reluctant to say they should just be contacting all schools and seeing if they'll let them volunteer, because I know schools are very busy and they're working very hard. But my general experience is that schools are very receptive to people who want to volunteer in a school or shadow in a school. Lots of people go back to their old secondary school. That's very common. I hear that quite a lot. So I do think that volunteering is a good way to do that. But out with of being in school, any experience with children can be really helpful, and whether it's brownies or coaching or charity work or, you know, anything where you can be in front of children and kind of consider how, you know, how you interact with children and how we help them. But certainly, you know, getting volunteering experience in school, it often is the thing that, you know, you asked me earlier about standing out. It's often the thing that makes someone stand out at an interview, because they've got more to talk about. They know what's going on in school. They've got some information around what it means to be a teacher. And, you know, when we're asking these questions, they can draw on that experience to then answer the questions more often than not better than other candidates who don't have that experience. So I would advise trying to volunteer, trying to get experience with young people, not least because it's going to strengthen your application and your interview, but it'll make you consider whether this is actually for you. It'll make you figure out, you know, is teaching for me? Do I want to work at secondary? Do I want to work at primary? You know, all these things that, you know, if you're getting into education, which is a career-long commitment, making sure that it is the right thing for you and that this is actually what you want to do. I think it has that added bonus of helping you with interviews as well. But it kind of confirms for a lot of people whether they want to do this or not in terms of, a career path.
I see sometimes we have international students.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what are the entry requirements for international students?
Essentially, it's very similar. It is that degree related to your secondary subject. It is an English and maths requirement, but of course, we then look at equivalencies for whatever country they are from. So we quite regularly get applicants from Canada, from America, and so we are aware of the equivalencies for that, and would support a student through that. Depending on whether they're a native speaker of English, there may be some requirement for a language test, kind of prove their proficiency in English. But the requirements are generally the same. Probably the only difference is that it would be more likely that their interview would be online, because they may well be in a different countries. But if they're in Scotland, lots of our interviews are face-to-face. So the requirements don't differ, but obviously they won't have studied higher English or National 5 Math. They'll have studied an equivalency. And so again, our admissions teams are wonderful with supporting applicants in what that equivalency is and checking. So there are a few extra steps in terms of paperwork and such that they might need to do, but it is still, so it just looks a bit different because we're talking about, the kind of differences around the world there.
Yeah, absolutely. And the UWS education is rated quite high, ranked quite high.
Yeah, I mean, we try to do our best. But I think primarily around the fact that we try to model what we want our teachers to be doing in school. And so as a result, it's interactive, it's engaging, it's generally small class sizes and small group work. And we are trying to inspire these student teachers to go and be the best version of themselves they can be when they're in school. And the only way we can do that is to kind of almost practice what we preach and to showcase what we want to see in school or what would be expected in school. So I think we're quite lucky in that sense that then that helps us have a really good relationship with our students and have a really kind of interactive, engaging experience on the course.
How should candidates approach questions about potential challenges they might face in the teaching profession?
I mean, there's lots of different ways you could answer that question, but I think it comes back to what I said earlier about drawing on your experience and thinking about maybe some of the unique challenges that student teachers might face. So, for example, you're only in school for 5 weeks, which is a really short time in the grand scheme of things. Building relationships with young people can be difficult anytime, but when you're a new face and building those relationships in a really short time, that could be, quite a big challenge. So it's thinking about the challenges that might be relevant to them as a student teacher is probably what we would be most interested in. Because we know that there are challenges in education, that nobody's kind of shying away from that really, but those challenges might look different for them as student teachers than if you're in a school permanently and working on those in a long term, whether that's closing the attainment gap or, any kind of the big priorities that we have in education at the moment. Quite often in our interviews, it's about how do we overcome those challenges. So if as a student teacher, it is difficult to build relationships in 5 weeks, then we think about, okay, what experience, what knowledge, what understanding do you have about how you might overcome that challenge and how you might build relationships, or at least try to, and think about strategies that might help. So for us, it's, if we're asking about challenges, it's showing knowledge of what those challenges would be, but also how you might deal with them and overcome them. And
I think it's important also for students to bring in their transferable skills.
Yes, yeah.
Because, when we're doing talks, some students will say, oh, the job that I'm doing at the moment is not related to teaching or anything else that I want to do. But actually, if we look closely, everything is interlinked. If they're working in hospitality and catering, they're working with customers, they're dealing with complaints, they're dealing with difficult customers and clients, so that can help students to answer these questions as well.
Yeah, for sure. Even just talking about, communication and being able to communicate in different ways, which obviously teachers are doing on a day-to-day basis. I think you're absolutely right. Talking about transferable skills will be super important. And I think with the PGDE, because it's really quite an intense year. It's, August to June. It's a full-time course to learn how to be a teacher. Even just managing workload can be a transferable skill. So if you've been at university and you've done your dissertation and you've had your part-time job and you've been balancing all these things, talking about what you've learned from that will absolutely be a skill or ability that you definitely will need on the PGD programme, because the workload and the the intensity of the courses, it's pretty high, I would say, because there's a lot going on in terms of placement and academics and balancing those things. So those transferable skills definitely would be beneficial to anybody who's coming into the PGDE in terms of preparing for managing that workload.
Yeah, definitely. And also, I'm assuming you would also expect them to have done a good research.
I don't necessarily think we need them to be, kind of hitting all the buzzwords about, oh, I know this module and I know this. Showing that you understand that the PGDE is a kind of intense year and that it balances university learning with placement learning. That kind of basic insight into the programme. Of course, we would want applicants to know about and to have done that research. But actually, what's more important is being able to talk about how they're going to manage that with their own skills and abilities that they have. So I guess you draw on that understanding of the course to then answer any question about, how do you manage the workload of the PGD, for example. If you understand the course, then you're then able to think about, well, what skills and abilities might I need to manage that and to be part of a course in that way and to be successful in it and to develop, kind of time management skills, organisation skills, being able to provide examples of how they've done that. Again, I think, quite often applicants will come into an interview and they'll be like, well, I'm organised and I'm prepared and I'm good at managing my time. And these are all absolutely legitimate things that we would look for. But being able to provide examples of how you've done that then strengthens the answer that you're given and actually makes it a bit more genuine. And, we get to know the applicant more because they talk about what they've done and kind of back up what they're saying, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you're talking there, competency-based interviews come into my mind. So should the students answer questions based on STAR techniques, the situation, task, action, and result ones, or not necessarily?
I don't think it's necessary, but I would advise that they give some serious consideration to how they're going to answer questions and that they prepare and practice. I don't think any of the questions that we ask are particularly surprising. We'll ask why you want to be a teacher. We'll ask what skills and abilities do you have for the course and for the profession in some form. We might ask a scenario-based question about a subject. So do think about how you structure your answers. And, sometimes people will come in and say, well, here are my top 3 skills and here are my examples of these skills that I have. And these will help me in the course because, that kind of structure. We encourage applicants to think about what works best for them. But the last thing you need is to come in and just kind of ramble and not make sense and not have any structure to your answer, because then it makes it difficult for the panel to kind of get what you're trying to say. So our biggest piece of advice would be think about how you're going to answer the question, practice it, bribe your family and friends to, practice interviews with you, a bit like when you were in school. Like we used to do mock interviews and stuff in school. So in our more competitive subjects and competitive courses, the interview and the ability to answer questions well is often the deciding factor.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially for those people who want to stand in front of people and explain things. They need to be able to explain themselves well and sell themselves in a good way, in a positive way as well. If students are listening now who haven't completed or haven't finished their final year yet, do you think they can apply, or do they have to have completed their qualification first?
Yeah, I'm going to use my favourite answer, which if any current students are listening, they'll just roll their eyes at. So it really depends. That's my favourite answer to almost every question. It depends. It depends on the course that you're interested in. It depends on the subject that you're interested in. For secondary, generally, if you are pending your qualification, so if you have to finish your degree, we do accept applications from candidates who are pending any qualification. Obviously, it would be conditional on completing that if you got an offer. Now, obviously, that's reviewed year on year, and it may change. And I think that's why the website being updated is so important, and for applicants to look at that and see what the current requirements are. But as long as it's prior to the deadline, or we're still accepting applications, of course.
Okay, that's great. So you need to check the website to see if they're accepting applications for your subject, but it sounds like most of you might still have chance if you put in your application, apart from PE, so check that out. So last question, what questions should candidates ask during the interview to gain a better understanding of the programme?
Yeah, I will refrain from saying it depends, but I think, like for example, in our PE interviews, we generally we offer candidates an opportunity to ask any questions that they might have, but for us, it's not an assessed part of the interview. So it's not like candidates need to come up with some amazing question that's going to impress us, and it's more just if they're genuinely interested in a particular aspect of the course, or they've maybe looked at the website and thought, oh, I want to know more about that. Those are the types of questions that generally we get in the physical education interviews, and we're very open and honest about. We don't need you to come up with some amazing question. Like that's not what we're doing. We just want to know if there's anything that you want to know about the course. I would always encourage applicants to ask questions in the interview, but just to be a bit cautious with that, because of course it can go the other way. You can ask a question about publicly available information that we might have expected you to look at related to the course, and so to just be a wee bit cautious about asking questions for the sake of it, because it's not really particularly beneficial if you're just thinking, oh, I must ask a question. But do think about what you might want to know about the course. Quite often people ask me, oh, how many days am I going to be on campus? Where might I go on placement? Like things that aren't necessarily publicly available on the website. And these things, we're more than happy to share, because it might be part of someone's consideration around engaging with the course and being a PGDE student. So
yeah, that's great. Thank you very much. So don't ask any curveball questions.
No, I mean, we're not looking for that. I think sometimes, again, people ask questions about, why did you get into education? And on some of our interview panels, we have current students available to talk to applicants. And so sometimes they, we'll talk to the students and ask them, what's it like to be a student here? Like those kind of questions. But yeah, no, I think probably the other one that I get quite a lot is, what advice would you give someone who's going into teaching? I get that quite a lot. So it's really up to the applicant to do it in a way that's meaningful for everybody and that's genuine, and potentially to give you, lets the interviewer or the panel get to know you a little bit better. But I know in some industries, like asking a question at the end of your interview is a big part of it. It shows, they're looking for that. But with the PGDE, because of the type of course it is, I think it is so important that people think about their responsibilities out with of university, and knowing information about the course can help them with that if they've got to do the school run, or if they've got caring responsibilities, or all these sorts of things. If you're preparing to become a PGDE student, you've got to know all this information to be able to make those decisions and to, manage your life and your work and your uni and all those sorts of things. So it's that kind of stuff that people ask us about the most. I would say not even just at interviews, at open evenings and any other sessions that we do. It's about, how do I prepare myself to be a PGDE student.
Thank you for your time. Our students gained quite a lot of information.
No problem at all. You're absolutely welcome. And maybe people could maybe talk about the podcast in their interview. I mean, honestly, I could be so famous.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was Elaine Wotherspoon, our PGDE Secondary Programme Leader. Thank you, Elaine. See you later.
See you later. Thanks so much.
You have been listening to the UWS Careers Café, the podcast from UWS Careers team with hosts Una Ramsey and Nigel Royal, where we talk about everything related to student and graduate careers. If you have enjoyed listening to this episode, please check out the others in the series. Also, you can follow the link in the description to our website, where you will find an amazing array of career resources to help you forge your path to a rewarding career.